This file from Thanksgiving Day 2015 brings us to the misty hunting grounds near Searcy, Arkansas, where a solitary hunter's traditional holiday outing transformed into a confrontation that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the wilderness. You're browsing the Cryptid Archives, narrative short stories based on real cryptid encounters, presented by Cryptids Across the Atlas. 3 in the Thicket. Back home, my family was probably just sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner. I could almost smell the turkey, hear the clatter of the dishes, and the warm buzz of conversation. The thought of my mother's cornbread dressing and my sister's sweet potato pie made my stomach growl, a sound that seemed too loud in the growing darkness. But our family did things differently. While most gathered around the dining room table, the men in my family had always taken to the woods on Thanksgiving Day, seeking game instead of gravy. It was tradition passed down through generations, as natural to us as breathing. My grandfather started it back in the 50s, claiming the woods were quieter on holidays, the game less weary. Everyone else is inside, he'd say, his eyes twinkling, leaving the whole forest to us. Even after his passing 5 years ago, we maintained the tradition, though his absence left a hole in our hunting party that nothing else could fill. His stories around the campfire had been as much a part of Thanksgiving as the hunt itself. The rain fell in a gentle whisper across the White County wilderness, each drop adding to the growing darkness of late November. I'd been sitting on my chosen rock for, hours, watching sheets of water ripple across the meadow below my hillside perch. The persistent drizzle had soaked into everything, turning the fallen leaves beneath my feet into a sodden carpet that muffled every sound. This spot was kind of new to me. Each year we chose different hunting grounds, seeking fresh adventures in unfamiliar territory. Usually, we hunted in groups, but this year was different. Family obligations had scattered us across different parts of the county, each seeking our own piece of solitude in these public hunting grounds. My cousin Mark had dropped me off mid-afternoon, promising to return once his kids were in bed. "Just like old times," he'd said, but we both knew it wasn't. The absence of the rest of our hunting party still hung heavy in the air. The rock beneath me had grown cold and uncomfortable, but it offered a commanding view of both the dense woods and open meadow below. My shotgun rested across my lap, its attached flashlight ready for the deepening gloom. The weapon had been my grandfather's last gift to me, passed down with a solemn spirit that seemed out of character for him. "Sometimes," he'd said, "you need more than just a gun to keep you safe in these woods." The first hour passed uneventfully, marked only by the steady drumming of rain on leaves and the occasional distant cry of a bird. I thought about previous Thanksgivings, about the stories we'd share around campfires after successful hunts. My grandfather used to tell tales of strange things he'd seen in these Arkansas woods. We'd always listened politely, chalking up his more fantastic stories to a hunter's natural tendency toward embellishment. One story in particular kept coming back to me as I sat there in the growing darkness. It was his last Thanksgiving hunt, just months before the stroke that would later take him from us. He described something moving through the trees near White Oak Lake, something walking on 2 legs but standing taller than any man. It wasn't just its size, he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. It was the way it moved, like it belonged there more than we ever would. We'd laugh it off then, but now alone in these unfamiliar woods, his words carried a different weight. The rain continued its steady patter, creating a hypnotic rhythm that nearly masked the first warning sign. Nearly, but not quite. It started as a low growl, unlike anything I'd encountered in my years of hunting these forests. Not a bear, whose growl I knew. It started as a low growl, unlike anything I'd encountered in my years of hunting these forests. Not quite a bear, whose growl I knew well enough to avoid. Not a mountain lion, whose screams had occasionally pierced the night. This was something different. A sustained, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the gathering mist. For 10 long minutes, that growl continued, setting my nerves on edge. I scanned the tree line repeatedly, my hands tightening on my weapon. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the forest itself was giving voice to some kind of primal warning. Every instinct honed through years of hunting screamed that something wasn't right. The woods had grown too quiet, the usual background chorus of birds and small animals silent. The temperature around me seemed to drop, or maybe it was just the cold finger of fear tracing its way down my spine. The mist had thickened, turning the familiar shapes of trees and brush into looming shadows that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. The woods know when something ain't right. When the birds go quiet, you best pay attention. Suddenly, the source of the growling became clear, or so I thought. A pack of coyotes burst from the tree line about 30 yards ahead, their gray forms ghost-like as they streaked across the meadow. I watched them go, my breath starting to steady. They moved with unusual urgency, not the casual lope of a hunting pack, but the desperate flight of prey. Mystery solved, I told myself, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of my certainty. And then the rock sailed over my head. It wasn't a small stone, but a proper rock, hurled with enough force to create a distinct whoosh as it passed. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, shotgun raised and flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Slowly, I swept the light across the tree line, where the rock had originated, near where the coyotes had emerged. The beam caught fragments of mist, creating ethereal shapes that seemed to dance and twist in the darkness. And then I saw it. The massive arm came into view first, covered in light brown hair, not fur, but hair. The arm had wrapped around the trunk of an ancient oak tree. This tree was easily 3 foot wide, yet that arm seemed to encompass half its girth. My light traveled upward, revealing a creature that had to stand at least 8 foot tall. The beam illuminated broad shoulders, a powerful chest, and finally, a face that would forever change my understanding of what was possible. Our eyes met in that moment, its gaze reflecting my flashlight beam with an eerie reddish-yellow glow. Even when I lowered the light slightly, those eyes continued to shine in the darkness, like twin embers burning in the gloom. There was something intelligent in that gaze, an awareness that froze me to my core. This wasn't the blank stare of some wild animal. There was something else there, something that spoke of consciousness and calculation. The growl came again, this time unmistakably from the creature before me, building up into a high-pitched scream that shattered the evening silence. My fingers squeezed the trigger before I'd even made a conscious decision to shoot, pure instinct, born of shock and fear. The report of my shotgun echoed across the valley, seeming to hang in the mist like the aftermath of a thunderclap. I knew I'd hit the tree. The sound of impact was clear enough, and in the next instant, the creature was gone, its massive form covering the ground with impossible speed. 3, maybe 4 seconds, and it had vanished into the valley below, following the same general direction as the coyotes. Despite its size, it moved with a fluid grace that defied explanation, leaving only swaying branches and disturbed mist in its wake. My hands were shaking as I approached the tree. The rain had begun to fall harder now, but there, at the point of impact, I found both blood and hair. Confirmation that this wasn't some trick of the light and shadow. My shot had likely caught its arm where it wrapped around the trunk. The reality of what I'd just seen and shot at hit me all at once. My neck and arms prickled with goosebumps as the full implications sank in. And this hair wasn't like any I'd seen before. It wasn't coarse like a bear's fur, but finer, almost human-like in texture. And the blood was red, too familiar. Standing there in the rain, I felt the weight of what I'd done settle over me like a physical burden. I'd shot at something I didn't understand, something that had shown no real aggression beyond a warning display. What happened next was either the bravest or most foolish decision of my life. Despite every horror movie lesson, despite the growing darkness and unfamiliar terrain, I decided to follow. My reasoning, such as it was, centered on the fact that the creature had run from me. I had the gun, I'd wounded it. I needed to know if it was down. Looking back now, I recognized the hubris in that decision, the dangerous assumption that I was somehow in control of this situation. The rain made tracking difficult, but the creature's path was clear enough. Broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and occasional spots of blood marked its route. The forest had changed somehow, transformed from a familiar hunting ground into something primordial and alien. Every shadow held potential threats. Every sound carried new meaning. I followed the path for perhaps 10 minutes, moving slightly off trail, when I came upon something that stopped me in my tracks. There, rising at least 8 or 9 feet high, stood a teepee-like structure surrounded by scattered animal bones. The smell that emanated from this area was overwhelming, primal, unlike anything I'd encountered before. This wasn't just the musty odor of decomposition or the sharp tang of predator marking. This was something else entirely. A scent that spoke of age and power and things better left undisturbed. The structure itself showed sign of intelligent design. Branches woven together with purpose, smaller twigs and leaves arranged to provide shelter from the elements. This wasn't the random debris pile of a bear or the practical den of a conventional predator. This was architecture, however primitive it may be. The bones scattered around it weren't randomly strewn but arranged in distinct patterns, suggesting purpose beyond mere disposal. Then a rustling sound drew my attention to a briar patch across the clearing. The brambles reached to my chest, but they barely covered the knees of the creature that stood there, staring directly at me. This one seemed different from the first, but before I could process that thought, a second figure emerged from behind a thicket. My finger never moved to the trigger. Something in that moment told me I was witnessing something far more significant than a target. And as if to confirm this, a third form appeared, smaller than the others, with distinctly reddish-brown hair, unlike the light brown of its companions. A family unit, I realized with dawning awe. I was watching a family. We stood there, hunter and hunted, in a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, but probably lasted no more than maybe 10 seconds. Two of them had the same eye shine I'd noticed earlier, glowing in the gathering darkness like distant campfires. Their faces, while undeniably alien, held expressions I recognized: curiosity, caution, and something that might have been concern. The smaller one, the juvenile, half hid behind what I assumed was its mother, peering at me with its almost childlike interest. Then, as one, they all turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest as if they'd never been there at all. Their movement was silent, practiced, the kind of stealth that comes from generations of avoiding detection. The forest seemed to swallow them whole, leaving me alone with the rain and my thoughts. The hour that had passed between my first encounter and this final sighting felt like a lifetime. As darkness claimed the forest completely, I made my way back to our predetermined pickup point, my mind struggling to process everything I'd witnessed. The weight of my shotgun felt different now, somehow heavier, with the knowledge of how I'd used it. Years have passed since that rainy Thanksgiving evening, but the memory remains as clear as if it happened yesterday. The shot I fired haunts me still, a reflexive action born of fear and surprise that, I gotta be honest, I'm not very proud of. But that final encounter, that moment of connection with what could only be described as a family, has left an incredible mark on my understanding of the wilderness and its secrets. Our family still hunts on Thanksgiving, carrying on the tradition my grandfather started, but I hunt a little different now. I try to be more careful, show more respect. Sometimes when we gather around the campfire to share stories, I think about telling them what I saw that day. But like the old-timers who kept their secrets, I understand now that some stories are better left untold. Sometimes on rainy evenings when the light plays tricks through the trees, I think about that juvenile with its reddish-brown hair, so different from the others. I wonder if it still roams those white county forests with its family, if they still build their teepee structures and watch us from behind ancient oaks. And I wonder, perhaps, they remember me too, the hunter who became the witness, who learned that day that some traditions are better left to change, and some shots are better left untaken. What do you make of the hunter's encounter with the family unit? While stress and poor visibility during rainy conditions can certainly affect perception, the specific details about the juvenile's reddish-brown hair and the deliberately constructed shelter are intriguing. If this was a genuine encounter, why do you think the creatures allowed him to witness their family group after he'd wounded one of them? Could this have been a deliberate demonstration of their intelligence and social structure? Or was there perhaps another explanation for what he saw in those shadowy thickets? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to hit that follow button. If you enjoy this encounter, please consider leaving an honest review. It helps other cryptid enthusiasts find these stories of the unexplained. And remember to keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see just on the edge of the road.